Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to talk about a few suggestions I've got for the challenges going into the 3.12 expansion, which will be coming out at some point during September. Now, so each of the last few leagues I've posted a challenge guide, and they vary in popularity, but they're not usually my most popular videos. They often come close, and they're definitely a lot of people's first introduction to my channel. So I pay a lot of attention to the challenges that come up, and each time I see the new challenges in a league, I start thinking, well, you know what? We've seen this one before about a lot of them. So I had a few ideas for some novel challenges that vary in difficulty. So some of these are things that anyone will get on their path to 12 or 40, whereas others are things that are very much challenges aimed at brutally testing the skills of really the top 0.5% of the player base. So vary a lot in difficulty to each other. The other thing that I've tried to do here is keep these as things that don't involve any new mechanics, because obviously I know nothing about 3.12. I'm not going to know anything until the expansion announcement, which is scheduled for the 1st of September. And also, the only game mechanic change that's needed to facilitate these challenges is adding a new source, so something that's divorced from the harvest mechanics of the Ultra Labyrinth keys. So the keys to get into the enhanced versions of the Eternal Labyrinth. So this is the monster level 83 labyrinths that exist. Currently they're gated behind Vivid Aberrach bulbs in the Harvest League. But they're not going to exist going forward into the core game in the future, and one of these involves the Uber Duber Labyrinths. Anyway, without further ado, these broadly go from easiest to hardest with a couple of exceptions. So first up is Godslayer's Preparation. There's been a tendency in recent leagues to include at least one challenge that is a bit of a training ground, I guess a bit of a pointer in the right direction. Something that comes up as a message when you do something that makes your character more tanky. It gives you a little bit of a notification saying, hey, you've just achieved this goal towards the generic tankiness challenge that's available. Anyway, Godslayer's Preparation is a little bit harder than the one that exists in the Harvest League, but not particularly difficult. And it's something that every player should try to have by the time they're getting through Act 6 or 7. And that is to achieve a 75% or higher resistance to each of Fire, Lightning, and Cold resist while suffering from Kitava's Cruel Affliction. So Kitava's Cruel Affliction is a debuff you permanently suffer after completing Act 5. So this is something that you can achieve at any point from there until the end of your character's progress. But the key thing is, it's really a reminder to you that what you need to do is fix your resistances when you get into Act 6. One of the biggest difficulty spikes in the game is going from Act 5, where other than Innocence, there's nothing brutally difficult in Act 5, even assuming you know nothing about the game. Innocence will wreck you, but you can sort of death rush him. And then there's nothing really difficult until the end of the act. Then you get into Act 6 and suddenly the trash mobs become really dangerous. And that's because of Kitava's Cruel Affliction, debuffing your resist. So let's say that you go into Act 6 with, say, you had 77% fire resist through Act 5. That was enough to get you through that act. And then suddenly that drops to 47. And then you wind up in the flames that various Karuri Shores monsters fire as a Scorching Ray Totem type thing that can then inflict fire exposure on you, dropping your resistances, I think, down as low as 22%. And then suddenly you're just in one-shot range from any pure elemental attack. So the intention here is that this is just a reminder. Get yourself to 75% resist. Next up is Can't Be Too Careful, which is an endgame equivalent of Godslayer's Preparation. So this is after you've suffered Kitava's Merciless Affliction, but it's not just to get to 75% resistances to the 3 elements, but it's also to get plus 20% Chaos Resist, which I think is a pretty achievable target, especially now that the Betrayal crafts have been available in the core game for a long time. And additionally, you're going to want to get overcapped to the point that you are still capped while suffering from elemental weakness. So this is this requires you to get a lot more resistances. Elemental weakness will be inflicted on your character partly by the curse, by the map mod that inflicts the curse on you. That's the most certain way to get it. But you will cop it before that point, just from one of the various necromancer monsters casting it on you. And that will cause you to still have, after your ally weakness, you'll still have a 75, 75, 75, 20 resist profile with this. This is something I think most players will get around level 85, maybe a little bit earlier if they go out of their way to try for it, and I think it'll be useful to work on. Next up we have Singular Focus, which is a training thing around the Pantheon. We've had some Pantheon challenges in the past, but usually they've been to fully upgrade the entire Pantheon. I don't think that's particularly practical. It's brutal for solo self-found players because Divine Vessels are somewhat rare. I think they drop about as often as Exalted Orbs. Obviously they're not worth anything like Exalts, but they're still brutal in SSF. What I wanted to do is encourage players to learn to upgrade one of the Pantheons first. So most players will settle on a specific Pantheon that they think, okay, this is the one that I normally use. And then they'll have alternate ones that they might jump to for specific situations. With Singular Focus, it's just simple as picking one of them, one of the Major God Pantheons, upgrading it fully, which is probably going to require you to progress to red maps, and then also upgrading one of the Minor God Pantheons, and then to allocate both of them. Next up we have Exotic Crafting, which is a tutorial of sorts about some of the weird and wonderful ways you can craft items in the game. So this is about doing 4 out of 8, and there's a big difference in the difficulty of these 8 options. The idea here though is that players can pick what they want to do from the options. So the first one is upgrade an incursion unique item using a vial with the Altar of Sacrifice. This is brutal in SSF and very accessible in a trade league, but it's something that I think people will make up their own mind whether they feel it's reasonable or not pretty quickly. Use Elva's 2 Implicit Krangle Chamber on a Cluster Jewel or a Sacrificial Garb. So using it on a Sacrificial Garb is something that players may not think of, but Sacrificial Garbs are easy to source. You just need to kill Atsuri and she drops one almost every time. And when you 2 Implicit Krangle them, there's a very high chance for them to transform into the unique item Shadow Stitch, which can't be sourced by any other means. So that's kind of cool. And I've also just added Cluster Jewel as an alternate option because I don't really see many people 2 Implicit Krangling Cluster Jewels, and they are pretty strong. But again, this is just an option. This is one of the easier ones. Raise the quality of a map or flask above 20%. You can do this with Betrayal. You can also do it with Perfect Fossils, although only for maps. And so that's something that's a bit of a choose your own method there. Raise a ring, amulet, or belt's quality to 20% with Catalysts. This requires you to simply research what Catalysts are and then find 4 of the same one and scour a piece of jewelry. But again, that's just an introduction to crafting with Catalysts. The intention here is that because this is one of the easiest of these options, a player that researches this will go, oh, you know what? I'm going to mess around with Catalysts a bit more in the future because they sound fairly effective and cool. Create an item with 2 Corrupted Essence modifiers. This is a real crafting puzzle. Yes, there is a solution to this. There are 2 ways of doing it in the Harvest League. One of them involves fracturing an item, so you might hit an item with an Essence of Hysteria, then try to fracture that Essence of Hysteria, a unique mod, and then after that hit it with a different essence. But there is a much easier way, and that is to use fossil crafting. A Glyphic Fossil will guarantee that you get at least 1 Corrupt Essence modifier, and a Tangled Fossil will give you a chance to get a second one. So that's the idea there. That's how you would do it in the normal game going forward. If there are alternate ways to fracture items in the future, of course, you'll be able to use that as well. But again, this is just something that is a real crafting puzzle that is something players can't necessarily solve without doing a fair bit of research into exotic crafting methods. Most players, though, would not be attempting this because Tangled Fossils are just, they're rare, and even though they're not very powerful at the moment, they're very rare. Raise the quality of a Val Temple map to 20%. This one, again, is a crafting puzzle, but it's probably an easier one. This teaches people about the 5-for-1 vendor recipe. So if you vendor 5 Val Temple maps that are corrupt and rare, you will receive back a rare and not corrupt one, which you can then quality up. Corrupt a unique map into a rare map. This is basically a freebie, but all it is just Val enough rare maps until one of them breaks. Split an item into 2 at the Beast Older is one that introduces the concept, but it's a genuinely rare craft. Most people will skip that one. Again, you only need 4 of them, so you can do this pretty comfortably with the quality, and then corrupt a rare into a Krangle a unique map. Solitude Empties the Mind is a new take on the various challenges to repeat a boss multiple times. And the intention here is that currently, in the current state of the game, all of these challenges are brutal for solo self-found players, and are much more reasonable in trade leagues where you can cooperate with other players and share your kills. Here the intention is that you need to kill Cirrus at Awakening level 8 to 12 times, which is a fair amount of effort for players. This would be, with just that sentence, would probably be beyond most 36 or 40 players, but be very reasonable if you're going for 40 or 40. However, you receive triple credit for kills where there are 5 portals left where Cirrus dies. The only way that there can be 5 portals left is, of course, if you are the only person that ever went into the instance. Because to start the Cirrus fight, you need to be in there in person, and so that means that you've used one of the portals already. So the whole intention here is that it's something that pushes back a little bit against the way in which service trading can undermine some of the spirit of some of the challenges, but still lets you, if you're playing a build that just can't function on its own like an Aura bot, you can team up with other players, but it's just more efficient to do things yourself. Exaltations is simply a tutorial in divination cards for high-end currency. So the Hoarder, Saint's Treasure, Abandoned Wealth in particular, those 3 are all very farmable. Long Con, Alluring Bounty, and House of Mirrors are not. House of Mirrors is really just in there for a joke. But essentially the idea here is that you pick 2 of these, you do a little bit of research in finding out where they drop, and then once you've done that, you focus on compiling a set. The Hoarder and Saint's Treasure are very reasonable to self-compile in solo self-found as well. As you go further down the list, they become less reasonable to do that. Apocalyptic Arrogance is a hard mode boss encounter, but a new type of them. So the hard mode boss encounters we've had in the past, there's often been something like fight High Templar Venarius in Cortex, which can be very difficult to source the entry key for the zone. The intention here with Apocalyptic Arrogance is that it's something a bit different. Here, the entry keys are not all that unreasonable. The challenge is in the fights themselves. So, you will need to source the following 3 entry keys. You'll need to source Misinformation, Terror, and Stalwart Defender's Ivory Watchstones. And there's a little bit of a tip to that in the reminder text for the actual challenge itself. That can be pretty unfair in solo self-found, and so I think only a 40 or 40 player will go for this. But Atsuri, Queen of the Val, the only way you can get her at monster level 86 is by getting her in the Temple of Atzoatl, and what you're going to want to do is, once you've spawned her in the Temple of Atzoatl, you're going to, let's say you've got 3 incursions left, you're then going to want to run a new map that is at monster level 86, which will then bring your whole temple up to monster level 86 in most circumstances. And then you'll be able to go and take on Atsuri at level 86. She is absolutely brutal because one of the effects that the temple has, Atsuri's presence in the temple gives all monsters in the temple plus 20% action speed, which is basically Onslaught. Atsuri is a boss that scales incredibly brutally with action speed. She actually ends up, she's probably one of the most brutal bosses when she's got Onslaught. I would say that Atsuri with Onslaught is more difficult than Uber Elder with Onslaught, at least the Alluring Abyss version of Atsuri. And that comes from experience during one of the various flashback leagues that happened, where each zone had various league effects in place. So for that reason, Atsuri with Atsuri in the temple is always brutal, and then raising her to monster level 86 makes her nastier again. This is intended to be a really difficult fight. Syndicate Mastermind is a step down in difficulty and is still nasty, but is nowhere near the Temple Atsuri. The way that you get the Mastermind to 86 is you need to do at least one safe house at level 86, and to do a safe house at 86 you need to do at least one Jun mission at 86. So that means you're going to need to use a tier 16 map with all 3 of the Ivory Watchstones, do a Jun mission in it, and that will be enough to make your Mastermind fight monster level 86, assuming that you've not done any really low level ones. Kaj Alai is one of the 3 bosses from Val Temple. She's the nasty one, and so I've added her there as well, just as something else that's really brutal. Again, this is intended to be a brutally hard challenge, except beyond SSF players unless you're really masochistic, but it's less RNG based, less grind based, and more challenge based than other brutal challenges from past leagues. What lies beneath is a challenge to do some of the hardest mods in some of the hardest nodes in the delve multiple times, and you get points equal to the depth of the encounter when you beat it. So if you kill the Grand Architect at 520 depth, then you get 520 credit towards your 12,000. If you kill all at 1,200 depth, then that's 10% on its own. The zones here that have been chosen include the 3 bosses, plus the 6 unique fossils, and the Echoing Lair, which is the bestiary themed node. The reason that's there is because it is ridiculously rare. It's like all of the unique fossils, it's got the exact same rarity as all of them. It's just that it doesn't have any good mods. I'm not actually sure that 12,000 is the right number for this one, but the goal here is that this is going to be a freebie for anyone going for 40, but is going to be a pretty difficult challenge for anyone going for 36. That's the goal I was going for. Maybe 12,000 is not the right number. Maybe it should be 8,000. Maybe it should be 20,000. Destroying Paradise to Chase Perfection is all about corrupting items, and the intention here is that for most players this is just a really cheap economic challenge. All you need to do is just pick up 5 various influenced items that you find in a map, and then crangle them with a Varlob, and that's all you need to do. However, some people will look at this and say, hey, you know what, it's a bit of a puzzle. What's the best thing I could do with a Shaper chest and a Varlob? What could I possibly get from that? There's a pretty impressive lot of corruption implicits. Maybe I'll hit one of them. Or someone else might think, I got these pretty solid Warlord gloves. They're not great, they're not good enough to wear on their own. But gee, if they were to hit curse enemies with level 12 temporal chains on hit, they'd be incredibly powerful. And so people will then start thinking about strategic. A minority of players will see this challenge and think, what are items I can strategically corrupt to try to chase particular implicits on them? And then is it worth trying? And for some people the answer will be yes. For most people this will just be a cheap economic challenge. Crafting with scrolls, the intention here is that this is about collecting common unique items from bosses. Atsuri's Promise being the quintessential example, one of the most powerful unique items in the game, but very, 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 very cheap in trade leagues because it drops with a 50% drop rate from the most accessible of all of the endgame bosses. Then we have Crown of the Inward Eye is another example. I think it's a 40% drop rate from Cirrus, and it's a very good item. Very, very strong item, very underrated. But it's also one that is very, very, very common and massively oversupplied in a trade league. The intention here, you only need to find 3 of them. So this requires you to fight Atsuri plus one other boss, and probably Atsuri a few times. You've got to pick up the step as well as the promise. And then just fight some other bosses, and you'll eventually get all of these. You need to identify them, but that's obviously a very easy step to take. Next up we have 8 Mod Guardians, and the intention here is that it's all about fighting some of the harder bosses from the history of the game, but fighting them while they're in 8 mod maps. There's never really been any incentive to run Shaper or Elder Guardians when they've got a hard set of mods on them. And the intention here is that you can get, like an encounter like the Chimera can be absolutely brutal when it's got the wrong map mods on it. And this is all about putting players up against the wrong map mods and getting them to prove themselves. You only need to do 6 of them because obviously with the requirement to corrupt them to 8 mods, you're going to need a fair number of maps that you're going to keep trying because it's only a chance to get an 8 mod map. I think for most players, you'll get all 4 of the Shaper Guardians pretty easily. The reason you can do that is, let's say that that RNG favors you dropping Hydras, and you get heaps of them. You can just turn your extra Hydras into the ones you're missing using Horizon Orbs. So let's say that you just can't get the Phoenix to drop, or every time you corrupt a Phoenix, it ends up not going 8 mods, it goes something else. You can just keep trying by converting all your new Hydra drops into Phoenixes with Horizon Orbs. It takes an average of 4 Horizon Orbs to do that. And then crank all your Phoenixes until you get an 8 mod one. Shouldn't take too long. I've added Vale Temple in here as well. The only way that you can do this is by using the 5-for-1 vendor recipe we mentioned earlier. So that's an option, but for most players I think you'll go with all 4 Shaper plus 2 of the Elder Guardians, and then Karjalai is just a silly little side option you can do there. Krangle is the next challenge I'm suggesting, and this is all about having some unfortunate incidents happen with Vale Orbs. So the first one is bricking a unique jewel and turning a unique jewel into something undesirable, whether that be one of the 3 real stinkers of unique jewels or whether it be a rare item. That's possibilities. Again, very easy to force that to happen. It's an average of 4 Vale Orbs and 4 unique jewels, which anyone that's even going for 12 challenges can do that. Using a Vale Orb, brick a unique into a rare item with 6 mods. So anytime that you Vale Orb an item and it goes rare, the resulting item, the rare item, will have the maximum number of mods that item base type can handle, which for jewels is 4 mods, for maps it's 8, but for most items it is 6. And so if you use this on anything, whether it be a ring, whether it be an amulet, whether it be a sword, whether it be a belt, just valing a bunch of those things will eventually get you there. Use a Vale Orb on an item with 19% quality. This is just simply one of those things where you learn the hard way that you can't fix the quality on an item after you've corrupted it. So it's all about teaching the potential misuses, really, of Vale Orbs. Survival in Trying Times is the next one I wanted to suggest, and this is about completing encounters with no players in the group dying. So this is about capturing a small aspect of the feel of hardcore play without being as brutally punishing. So hardcore has one thing really going for it, and that is that the stakes are higher. However, it also has something that makes it unplayable for a lot of people, including myself, and that is that it is absolutely incompatible with an internet connection that isn't flawless. Survival in Trying Times goes for a medium stakes approach to encounters. So if you only need to do 6 of these encounters, and I've deliberately picked a large number. I think there's 13 of them. These are some of the endgame encounters that are pretty challenging to beat. They vary in difficulty, so at the easier end you've got things like the Shaper, you've got the Elder, and then at the harder end you've got things like the Kosis the Revelation, High Templar Venarius, and the Cortex, and all the Crystal King. Most players that do this will probably go for Shaper, Vale Temple Trio, the Elder, maybe the Uber Elder, maybe Cirrus, Abaxoth if they find him. Domain of Timeless Conflict is pretty doable. So there's a bunch of different options there. Maybe Kosis if you find him in a low tier map. They're all reasonable options, and I think it won't be that hard to find 6 of them. The intention here is that it's something that's a little bit harder for you to just be carried through by another player, because you still need to not die in these encounters. Some of these fights you can do that, guys. Say for instance the Shaper, you can just stay entirely outside the arena, same with Vale Temple Trio, but other ones that's a bit more difficult to do. Anyway, say for instance, Cirrus Awakener of Worlds, that's not an option at all. You can't be inside the zone and not be involved in the fight in some way. So this is a focus on careful execution rather than brute force, and it's moderately unforgiving without being brutal. That's the intention here. 8 mod map grind is the next one I wanted to propose, and this one is about completing high tier 8 mod maps, but 256 is a large number. Don't worry, there's something else coming that will ameliorate that. You receive octuple credit when the map is completed with 5 portals still remaining. So again, this is something that makes it less brutal for solo self-found players, or for players who play in the trade league, but mostly play solo self-found and then just trade for build enabling items or a few things here and there. This is something that you can do that will let you, as long as you're able to complete the maps deathless, you will only need to do 32 of them. If you die a few times, let's say that you die in 20 maps, then in that case, you're going to need to do a total of 52 8 mod maps. On the flip side, if you're dying in most of them, and playing reckless, like I tend to do, this is going to be a really brutal, really brutal grind. Especially given that they're all tier 14 and higher. So you can approach this in different ways, but it rewards a careful play style, and it rewards a well-rounded character that can do things themselves. Lascarab has arrived is the next challenge I wanted to suggest. And this is about doing heavily juiced maps. So complete 6 8 mod maps while they are affected by at least 3 sextant mods and at least 3 scarabs. So the intention here is that this is aimed at 24 or 40 players that maybe don't have experience at doing heavily invested maps. And a map that is an 8 mod map with 3 sextant mods and 3 scarabs should drop about 5 to 6 times the loot of a scoured map, and about 3 times the loot of an Elk and Go map. So for that reason, this should be an absolutely massive loot explosion experience for those players, and it gives them a window into what high investment mapping feels like. If they like that feeling, then they can keep with it. The last thing I wanted to propose is 2 new endgame grinds. One of them is to complete 20 maps at monster level 84 or higher while you are 60% delirious or more. This is a fairly expensive one in that it's going to require you to use a lot of delirium orbs or a lot of fractured fossils, but it's something that is not an enormous amount of grinding, but it's about doing a lot of challenging content. The next one is to complete 20 augmented eternal labyrinths. So that means kill a Zaro at monster level 83. Obviously this can't be done if the harvest Uber Duber labyrinths don't go core in some way, and that's why I suggested making them core earlier on. The reason I suggest this is that the labyrinth is something that the level 75 labyrinth, when it came out, it was murderously hard. Like the very top players could do it just fine, but I would say that the section of the player base that could comfortably do the Eternal Labyrinth when it first came out, it's probably about the same as the percentage of the player base that can do Cirrus Deathless now. I was pretty small. The encounters felt brutal. Izaro was just a killing machine that would just butcher you. And I remember my first completion, I was actually carried through the Eternal Labyrinth on my first completion because I lucked out and got a Divine Shrine. After I got that, I got my Ascendancy, and then I went back into the Eternal Labyrinth and still had a lot of trouble repeating the feat when I didn't have the Dark Shrine giving me a Divine Shrine, because that was an enormous power boost. The augmented Eternal Labyrinths, the ones that were added in the Harvest League and may not end up going core, they're really great because they capture that feeling, but there's no major character power milestones gated behind it. So for players that want to capture that feeling of what the Labyrinth was like when it was brutal, they've got the option to do so. But for players that don't like that, they can just completely and utterly ignore the content and go and run the things that they like, and they're not missing some massive power milestone for their character. So that's the reason I wanted to suggest that. Anyway, they're my suggestions for challenges for the upcoming league. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.